I want to start this video by recommending you visit Gillian Clarke's own website. It's absolutely fantastic, and there's a section there which allows students to email Gillian with questions about her poem, in this case Catrin, and she'll answer them, and that's such a useful insight into the mind of the poet. What's great as well, when you read the discussion on the website, is the fact that she'll sometimes say, "Oh yes, I haven't read that image in that way," and that tells us something very important about poetry. We saw in relation to Jane Weir's Poppies how images in particular are very open to interpretation, and in a sense, once you've interpreted a poem, it's yours, you own it, and that's a wonderful thing. Anyway, that's a preamble. I normally start with some comments about poems context, because you do have to comment on that in the exam, and you'll already have gathered that Gillian Clarke is a contemporary poet. She actually works as a lecturer in creative writing. She works at the University of Glamorgan, and she still lives in Wales, where she was born. She has a small holding with her husband, and they rear a flock of sheep. They care for their land according to conservation and organic principles. If you read more of Gillian Clarke's work, you'll see that nature and the love of nature is a very strong theme. She has 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, Catrin. So clearly, Catrin is an autobiographical poem. Asked what it was about, she replied on her website that it's a poem questioning why her beautiful baby had to grow up and become a teenager. So this poem explores those inevitable conflicts that all families experience between parents and teenage offspring.
I can remember you, child, as I stood in a hot white room at the window watching the people and cars taking turn at the traffic lights. I can remember you, our first fierce confrontation, the tight red rope of love which we both fought over. It was a square environmental blank, disinfected of paintings or toys. I wrote all over the walls with my words, coloured the clean squares with the wild, tender circles of our struggle to become separate. We want, we shouted, to be two, to be ourselves. Neither won nor lost the struggle, in the glass tank clouded with feelings which changed us both. Still I am fighting you off as you stand there, with your straight, strong, long brown hair and your rosy, defiant glare bringing up from the heart's pool that old rope, tightening about my life, love and conflict, as you ask, may you skate in the dark for 1 more hour.
I split the text up just to fit the lines on the slides there, but actually the poem is written in 2 stanzas. The first is set in the past and it describes Catrin's birth, and then the second stanza moves into the present tense and a very different kind of struggle. Daughter, much older now, wants to skate in the dark. Mother won't allow it. The poem's written in free verse, which allows Gillian Clarke to create an almost spontaneous feel, as if the speaker is grappling with intense, complex emotions. So she doesn't want those to be tidied up in any kind of irregular form. The rhythm is also irregular, and for the same reason. The poem doesn't flow, it's not supposed to, and Gillian Clarke's use of Enjambment and caesura is also key to that. They're very important terms in relation to this poem, so here's a quick reminder of what they mean. Enjambment is the continuation of a phrase over a line break, and caesura a strong pause within a line. These 2 devices often occur together, and they do allow poetry to sound more like natural speech. Already established then is the fact that this is a first-person poem, deeply autobiographical, but also conveying a universal message about mother-child relationships. So the first stanza is set in the labour ward, the hot white room where Gillian Clarke is about to give birth to Catrin. She's looking out of the window, and there's that contrast between, on the one hand, normal life going by, people, cars taking turns at the traffic lights, and on the other hand, this monumental experience that Gillian Clarke is going through. The labour ward doesn't sound a pleasant, conducive place to be, not the place you'd choose to have a baby perhaps. It doesn't sound natural, comforting at all. It's hot, white, the opposite really of homely. The next few lines introduce the important image of the tight red rope of love, which is a reference to the umbilical cord. It's red because of the blood that's flowed between the mother and child in the womb. But red also evokes a sense of passion, and in that way it contrasts with the whiteness of the labour ward. Indeed, the sterility of the ward is returned to in these lines because it's described as a square environmental blank. There's nothing to add interest or variety or comfort to this strangely inhuman place. It's, quote, disinfected of paintings or toys. Clinical coldness is evoked by this imagery. It's important to note that the birth itself is described as a conflict. It's a fierce confrontation. And that tight red rope also evokes the idea of a tug of war, a rope pulled tight between two opposing sides. Notice the use of enjambment, emphasising that idea of two sides, things being split down the middle. We have tight red rope, a phrase broken by the enjambment, and also both fought over. So the way that the phrases are split across lines reinforces the idea of these two locked in this struggle which is birth, not being on the same side, but being in opposition. Fierce opposition. The baby's being pulled out of its snug, warm home of the last 9 months. These are the final lines of the opening stanza about the birth. Begin with an ambiguous image. I wrote all over the walls with my words. Now, it obviously has to be metaphorical. She's giving birth. She's not running around the walls writing on them. So could this perhaps be a reference to her colourful language? She does say that in her struggle, in her agony, she shouted. She also uses the adjective wild to suggest complete abandonment. She doesn't care what she says. Or perhaps during childbirth, she's actually thinking about a poem. She's resolved to try to capture this experience later. And so in her imagination, she's writing on the walls of the ward. Both those, or indeed your own interpretation, you could suggest, couldn't you? You could go to Gillian Clarke's website and see what she has to say about it. Notice the enjambment in this stanza again, our struggle to become separate. So cleverly, the idea of separateness is reinforced by the breaking off that word from the one before it over the line divide. Wild, tender circles is another perplexing image open to interpretation. Obviously, contractions happen on a cycle. It's a cyclical process. So the reference to circles could evoke that, the contractions. Wild and tender, almost oxymoron being used there, two opposites, something violent, wild, but also tender, gentle. Perfect description of birth, really, because obviously there's violence, there's pain, there's brutality in giving birth, but there's also huge love, huge tenderness, and this whole conflict of experience and emotion is beautifully captured there in those adjectives: wild, tender. These are the opening lines of the second stanza, the longer stanza. There's this sentence and then one long sentence to finish. So dealing with this one first, Gillian Clarke is again referring to the hospital. Now it becomes a glass tank. Again, emphasising the idea that this was an inhuman, clinical, cold, horrible place to have a baby in. A place where she felt almost like a specimen within a glass tank rather than like a human being. The birth she recalls as a struggle, but not a struggle that one side either lost or won, and in that way it's similar to the struggle that she moves on to describe in this stanza, the present day struggle, not one that either mother or daughter wins ultimately, just simply a struggle, a very intense one. The struggle in the hospital, in the glass tank, changed us both. Well, clearly it did, because Gillian Clarke emerges a mother, the mother of a daughter, and fundamentally changed by that. And of course, the child, the baby, is born. So it's at this point in the poem that we move into the present tense with the word still. Still I am fighting you off. So the struggle of the birth was long ago, but struggle remains a feature of this relationship. There's some pride in those adjectives that Clarke uses to describe her daughter: straight, strong, long brown hair, and your rosy, defiant glare. There's a strength in those adjectives. Catrin, we infer, is a spirited girl. Defiant suggests that. Her rosy complexion suggests a vigour and a health which must gladden Gillian Clarke's heart. So there's a sense that yes, there's conflict, but a suggestion too that this is the way it should be. There's nothing dull or compliant about Catrin. This present struggle has occurred because the daughter wants to skate in the dark. Her mother, though, is concerned for her safety, and there must be so many conflicts between parents and children that are around that very issue. Clarke said in her website that she chose this idea of skating in the dark because it seems to capture something of what youth is about. Skating in the dark is a beautiful thing to do, but a dangerous thing. Remember that tight red rope of love in the opening stanza? Absolutely central, that image, to this poem. It returns here. This time it's an old rope that's brought up from the heart's pool. So here Gillian Clarke is saying that the umbilical cord which connects baby with mother still exists. We can't see it when our children grow up, but nonetheless it's there. And when they try to do something dangerous, risky, then we feel it tug. We can't allow that. Clarke refers to that old rope tightening about my life, trailing love and conflict. So that verb tightening suggests constraint, lack of freedom. And of course, as a parent, you aren't free anymore. You have responsibility. And that sense of responsibility inevitably leads to conflict when you've got a daughter wanting independence. But it's a conflict that's born out of love. That old rope connecting mother and daughter trails not just conflict, it trails love and conflict. So motherhood isn't easy. It's almost as hard as childbirth itself. It's a struggle. But what causes the struggle, what fuels it, is the most intense, powerful, fundamental, life-changing love. A feeling that springs right from the heart's pool, as Clarke says. An image that brilliantly evokes its depth and mystery. Well, this poem's certainly about conflict. It begins and ends with conflict. But it's a conflict that is inseparable from love, as I've said. Parental love. a love which ties you in the most profound way to another human being, and which in its fierce protective intensity can be very difficult, especially when that other human being is growing up and asserting her independence.